When I was 10, I was almost kidnapped. I lived in a great town. Crime was rare and everybody got along. So my parents had always been okay with me going a couple miles away from the house. I have a large family, and usually my cousins are with me, so that just reinforced the whole safe idea. But that all changed on that day. My cousins Mikey and Lily were over at the time. I was 10, I'm a boy by the way. Mikey was 8, and Lily was 6. We told our parents we were going fishing at the creek. That was 1.5 miles down the road. We took the dog with us. It was a pretty hot day, so we wore our bathing suits down. After doing the routine snake check, we started swimming and fishing and just having a great time. Until that truck came. It was a red truck, pretty beaten down. But that was normal for our time, with all the farmers and such. It stopped right in front of us, so we got out of the creek to see what this guy wanted. As soon as he rolled the window down, I got a bad feeling. His hair was greasy and black, and he smelled like he hadn't taken a shower for quite a long time. He was a big guy, wearing a dirty white tank top. I couldn't see his pants. He just stared at us for a minute like he was sizing us up. He kept his eyes on Lily for an uncomfortably long time. I'm not gonna lie. Lily was pretty good looking for a 6-year-old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, pretty tall for her age. But that didn't give that guy any excuse for staring at her, like he was some sort of starving animal who had just found his next meal. You just gonna stare at us or what? Mikey said, breaking the silence. I could tell he was annoyed because he was probably missing a bite. But that man didn't care. Yeah, it's a pretty good-looking girl you got there, he said. He said it as if she were a prize, some sort of thing to be proud of. I'd give anything to have me a girl like that. Well, she's my sister, so back off, Mikey said, stepping in front of her. Mikey wasn't usually super protective of her, but he was starting to tell something was wrong. We started to head back to the water when the fucking creep said, "You kids want to come to my house, see my pony?" Lily had a little bit of a horse obsession, so she was sold. This guy was fine to her, but Mikey and I were certain this guy was going to do something to us, something bad. Come on, Lily. Let's start heading back. We can just swim in the pool, I said. I was hoping my voice didn't sound as scared as I was. We headed back down to the water, got our poles and the dog, and headed back to the road. The guy watched us the whole time. Lily was upset about the pony, but we convinced her swimming was just as fun. But as we started to head back towards my house, back towards safety, the guy turned around. He was right behind us now. "Hey, Lily," he called out. "If you come into my house, I'll let you ride my pony. She's really cute." It scared me that the guy called her by name for some reason, but Lily didn't catch on. "No, we're going swimming now," she said. She had apparently lost all interest in the pony. So the guy just decided to get closer to us. I'm not kidding when I say he was probably 3 or 4 yards behind us. We moved to the side, and so did he. That was when we started panicking. I whispered to Lily to pretend like she saw something cool in the woods. She was confused why me and Mikey were suddenly so eager to get off the road, but she went along with it. "Hey look, a bunny," she said, pointing to the woods. "Oh, let's go catch it," I said with feigned enthusiasm. We started heading into the woods when the creep called out again. "You kids are gonna need some help with that rabbit. I'll be right out." This guy just invited himself into our imaginary bunny hunt to get away from him. I knew now that we could be killed. We were still no more than a mile away from home, and none of us could move faster than his truck. No thank you," we said, backing slowly into the woods. The dog was growling now. Obviously she now sensed something wrong. "I won't take no for an answer." And as he hopped out of the truck, I could see what he was wearing for pants. Nothing. The man had nothing on but a tank top. No underwear, no socks, nothing. Lily now understood why we had been so afraid of this man. She screamed and I picked her up and ran. The guy ran too. The guy was pretty slow, but carrying Lily slowed me way down. Remember, I was 10, and I was very underweight, and I knew I couldn't do this for much longer. So I put Lily down and climbed up a tree, pulling her up right after me. I screamed at Mikey to get the adults, and he took the dog and ran. I helped Lily up into the tree higher and higher, until we couldn't climb anymore. The guy waited under the tree the whole time, yelling how he was going to get us down, and how he was gonna take us home, and how we were gonna ride his fucking pony. Lily knew there was no pony now, so we just screamed and cried for a good 15 minutes. The guy tried to climb the tree a couple times, but he was too fat. I guess it hurt his bare skin too much. Eventually, he heard our parents yelling and booked it to his truck. We heard it speed away, and a minute later our parents were there, and we were screaming and crying about the naked man with the pony. I wasn't allowed outside for a long time after that. I didn't want to be alone outside after that. It fucking terrified me that a man tried to kidnap, rape us only 2 miles from my home. Even 4 years after that, I still made my parents or older family come outside with me. I was fucking terrified. I never saw that man again. Our parents filed a police report, but they never found him. Probably came to our area just to pick out a few victims. Glad he didn't get any. So scary, pantsless pedophile. Let's not ever meet again. 1. So let me set the stage. I'm dicking around, trying to figure out what I want to do in life. My uncle has this shitty little 1-bedroom house in a cul-de-sac he lets me stay in for basically a pittance in rent. Me, with my shitty little retail job, has never heard anything better. So I move in there. Literally, the first 10 minutes I'm there, creep number 2 pops out of his house. One over and across from mine. Think Mr. Heckles from Friends, but tan and bald on top. I go to the house first in my truck because I want to coordinate my male cousins and brother in the U-Haul. And I guess an unaccompanied female was just too much for this guy to resist. He started talking before he was all the way across the street. Just this constant stream of talk that kind of runs into itself. I think he was talking about the people that lived in the neighborhood before. Anyway, He goes off in this long rant about how people who lived in the house before me bred pit bulls and let them tear up the lawn, and how he worked with the owner to help him reseed the yard. I manage not to laugh as I tell him the owner, my uncle, had been the previous tenant, owned one beagle, and that the lawn had never been torn up. I was kinda curious as to how he'd react. The guy just blinked and gave his head this weird sideways shake and went off on another tangent. That would become all too familiar to me in the coming months. The guy would never admit to a lie, just start off on a new one. Anyway, at that point, my crew showed up and we did some righteous moving. I noticed Mr. Hackles popped back into his house as soon as mails showed up. Something that would also become very familiar to me in the coming months. Mr. Hackles would never knock on my door to see if I was in. He would stand at my front window with his face right up against the glass and his hands around his face. Creepy. Anytime I was out and unaccompanied, he would whip out of his house and come over to me talking constantly. It was more annoying than scary at this point. The dude just had an idea that I was this young, naive girl that needed advice. Problem was, I wasn't. And what's more, his advice was always wrong. He would tell me things like refrigerator bulbs couldn't be replaced. So he would help me remove the back paneling on my refrigerator and swap it out. Or he would tell me to do flat-out illegal things like pour motor oil down the drain. Well, about the time I got back together with my on-again, off-again guy friend, that's when it took a turn for the creepy. The dude turned from advice to complaints. He'd show up at 9 at night complaining my dog was barking, and I'd be like, what the fuck? What dog? And I started finding all these little things amiss around the house. My outside faucet would be on when I went out in the morning. My mail would accidentally wind up at his place, even though it had not happened even once before. Once I nearly shit myself when I came back home from work and found the front door unlocked. Nothing was missing, but all my couch cushions were rearranged, and there was a glass in my dish drainer that wasn't there when I left. Thank God he didn't steal my underwear. When I was outside with a man, even if it was one of my relatives, Eccles would sit on his porch and glare. The last straw was when he slashed my tire. I have no idea what set this tantrum off. I guess it was because my boyfriend spent the night that night. He usually didn't, but I had had a bad case of the horns, and suddenly my twin mattress wasn't too narrow for two people. When I stepped out for work the next morning, I noticed my truck was at a distinct angle. Before I even got all the way to the truck, Eccles was out of his house and legging it fast over to my house. He was trying to tell me about a girl he used to know had her tires slashed the exact same way. That's about all I could extract from it. I was at the end of my patience and was like, fuck her, I know it was you. He blinked and did a head shake and started off on telling me how to change a tire. I yelled at him that I wasn't a fucking infant. I knew how to change the tire on my own goddamn car. Well, boyfriend heard the yelling and came out. so Heckles scurried back to his burrow. I called my uncle after letting work know I had to miss a day because I wanted out of that place. My uncle told me to hang on, and not less than an hour later he was over with his tallest son. My uncle wanted to talk to the guy directly, note, never do this, and get him to back off. He had looked up the house renter and, surprise, 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 it wasn't Heckles. My uncle had the idea that if he threatened him with eviction, again, not a good idea, he would back off. So my uncle made a big show of walking over there and knocking on the door. No dice. He hollered at me to call the cops. All bluff. He wasn't going to let the cops in on something as juicy as this. Heckles finally opened the door and asked what he wanted, totally innocently. My uncle said, "You're not the renter here. I looked it up." Heckles looked down at the ground and his reaction still blows me away. "Please don't tell anybody." So as it turned out, Heckles had known the guy renting the house since before he went in the mental hospital. You heard that right, mental hospital. Heckles got out, and his family had cut contact, so he decided to hit up the guy for a place to stay. Turns out the guy had a stroke at some point and wound up in the hospital. So Heckles was basically squatting in the place. Well, when my uncle was done, the guy never went near me again. I know he got results, but I still wish I would have called the cops because, for all I know, Heckles is still out there somewhere, unmedicated, and waiting for the next stalking target. I'm a 24-year-old girl, but at the time of this story, I was about 16, and my younger sister was about 14. We were living in a pretty bad neighborhood, along with my mom, just the three of us, as my 4 older brothers had moved away, and my dad had passed away 3 years prior. The house we lived in was old and in kind of bad shape, but we kept it very clean, nice on the inside. It had its benefits though. It came with a huge backyard. I'm talking one full backyard complete with a garage-sized tool shed that was totally dilapidated and abandoned, but we couldn't afford to tear down and also held sentimental value. Right at the edge of our short metal fence, and on the other side of the fence, was a large unfenced plot of land that also belonged to us. We called it the Back 40. Now, my mom is not mentally all there. She has the mental and emotional capacity of a 15-year-old girl. But she's also stunningly beautiful. Few people notice. She was also a bleeding heart, meaning basically she was very trusting and wanted to save the world, while also not making very smart choices and honestly putting her tiny 4'11", 90-pound self in danger, as well as me and my sister a lot. One of the people she constantly tried to save was her best friend, Karen. Karen was your typical white trash, hardcore, drink a fifth of cheap vodka in the morning type of alcoholic. She'd show up at our place hammered a few times a week, sometimes for good money, to hang out, to steal the change off my dresser. You get the idea. Well, one day she shows up with a camper and a borrowed truck. She tells my mom she needs somewhere to keep it, because her new husband kicked her out. I immediately think it's a bad idea. It looks like it hasn't been touched since the 70s. It probably has rats, and it's probably stolen. But my mom, the bleeding heart, says, fine, You can park it behind the shed. I agree, because then it won't be an eyesore, at least. Mistake number 1. She parks it between the metal fence and the back of the shed. So just the very end of it and the hitch are visible from the front of the shed. We all kind of forget it exists for a few months. Then one day, our cousin abandons a puppy at our house. It's a pit bull, and it takes to us immediately. We love him unconditionally, and he loves us back just as hard. We don't even mind that he barks at anyone walking by, or any new people in the house. He usually barks, sniffs, and loves them anyway. I begin to feel kind of safe at the house. A feeling that I hadn't had since the last of my brothers left home. A few months later, it's summertime and my mom is teaching summer school, so my sister and I are home alone. It's about noon and we decide to go sunbathing in the backyard. We toss on our bikinis, grab towels, and lay out in the sun, reading and talking, bonding like only a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old can. But I start to feel uneasy. I start to feel like I'm being watched. I don't know why, but I just get the feeling we should go inside. My sister is a very nervous girl sometimes, prone to crying and breaking down when she's spooked. She's the baby of 6 kids, can't blame her. And I don't want to alarm her, in case it's nothing. So I just tell her I'm hungry and we should go inside. She agrees quickly, and I can tell she's rushing as she grabs her stuff. Fuck. She feels it too. Probably doesn't want to seem like a baby though. We basically run inside the house. Our kitchen is at the back of the house, with a big window above the sink. We stare out of it. We can see the whole backyard. As soon as we're inside, my sister asks if I felt like I was being watched. I say yes. We have a creepy neighbor who is in love with my mom, Karen's ex-husband, who sometimes creeps around the woods next door. My sister says maybe it's him. Normally I'd agree, but I knew he was currently in jail for arson. I start to get freaked out, and then out of the corner of my eye, I see a flash of a man near the old camper behind the fence. It's so far away, and he moved so quickly I didn't get a good look. My sister sees it too, and freaks out. Our pit bull is too short to see out the window, so he sits calmly at our feet. My sister calls his name and, thinking quickly, lets him out the back door. He goes bounding out, catching the scent of an intruder. Our view is blocked by the shed, but we lock the back door and crack the window. And we watch and listen to him barking viciously. A man's voice saying something. Then more barking and a struggle, and then nothing. We can't see what's going on, but we're freaking out. I tell my sister to find the house phone. She runs upstairs to look for it. I run around and lock the front door, double-check the windows, and snap the back window shut. I still can't see my dog, and now I can't hear anything either. My heart is pounding. This kind of neighborhood, the cops take hours to come. I'm struck with the memory of calling 911 when my dad collapsed. Before I knew he was dead as soon as he hit the floor. A massive heart attack. Telling the operators my dad was dying. It took them an hour to show up. What could some man do to us in an hour? I'm so scared because, above all else, I love my sister. I grab a steak knife from the counter and hide the rest in a drawer. My sister comes bounding down the stairs, already on the phone, telling the operator what's going on. I tell her to go sit in the living room, try to see if the neighbors are outside, maybe flag one down. All of a sudden, our dog comes bounding around the side of the shed, happy as a clam. I can see the back door from the window, and I check to see if it's clear. He reaches the back door the same time I do, and I let him in, slamming the door shut behind him. My sister comes running in, and we both examine the dog to see if he's been hurt. What we see at that moment still makes me nauseous to think about. We look at each other, embarrassed. I don't know what to say. I don't know if my sister is old enough to know what we're looking at. We're silent until she breaks quiet. Is that cum on his face? I threw up in the sink. That answers her question. I lift my head from the sink, and out the window I see a man jump the fence toward the back 40, away from us, and take off running into the woods that neighbor our house. My sister, still on the phone, doesn't mention what we found on our dog's face. Out of embarrassment, out of fear. Maybe because she was scared to admit she knew what cum looked like. I don't know. Those are the reasons I don't mention it to the cops who show up 45 minutes later, though. I'm assuming her reasons were similar. The cops thoroughly checked the woods, but the man was long gone. We checked the shed, but it had obviously not been entered in years. Finally, they checked the camper. Someone had been living in there for a while. Clothes, CDs, a CD player, dog toys, food, needles, and other drug paraphernalia were found inside. The dog toys explained how the guy was able to calm our dog down long enough to mess him. He was a sucker for a raw bone or plushy toy. Police said it was a harmless drifter, looking for a place to live, and told us to get rid of the camper. We did, that day. I'd like to say my mom learned a lesson, but she didn't. I did, though. My sister is tougher than I thought. And she was probably ready for the sex talk. Please be aware the following story contains themes of extreme animal abuse. 3. I was 19 when all of this mess was brought into my life, and I've never really talked about it with anyone. I'm an animal lover, and this really took a toll on my mental state. I was living with my grandmother, who claims all this to be my fault. First off, you need to know my grandmother can be a nightmare. She's made way more enemies than friends. She's hard to be around and is one of those people who calls the cops on her neighbors if they play music outside. So it was no surprise to me when she decided to move out of the city and relocate to a rural area after my grandfather passed away. She moved to this town where they have a grand population of maybe 500, and she lived on the very outskirts of town. She had neighbors. She just had dense forest between the houses. I moved in with her, in fear of her living on her own. After making some arrangements, getting a job, transferring to a college that would be closer, etc., I relocated to help her in any way I could. But with no surprise, by the time I got up there and settled, she complained to me she was already having issues with the man who lived next to her. I just had no idea how huge these problems really were. My grandmother decided to try her hand at dog breeding and raising chickens. Her focus was on small breed dogs and laying hens. I told her the chickens were a good idea, but I didn't believe in backyard breeding. But it was her house and her land, so she did what she very damn well pleased. Things started off bad. Her neighbor that she was having issues with came to the property line every day and watched me do everything from feeding the animals to just yard work. He always had a beer with him, and he was totally creepy. He was older, around 54-ish, with grayed hair and a smile that instantly made you uncomfortable. It scared me out of my mind, and I contacted the police multiple times. But alas, the police said they could do nothing since he was on his property and said nothing to me, ever. After the first month of him creeping is when my grandmother decided to take things into her own hands, and naturally made things worse. This guy started bringing a freaking machete with him to watch me. And I even woke up to him on our porch swing one morning. He just said nothing, got up, and went on his way. After time passes from my grandmother basically declaring war with this man, he escalated to throwing trash in the yard daily. He built a barbed wire fence on the property line. There was no need, his property line is thick forest. And then the icing on the cake. My grandmother's chickens started coming up dead, necks broken and just left there. The police couldn't do anything because being creepy isn't evidence. I tried to stay up and catch him, but with all my chores, school, and work, I think he watched me enough to know my days off, and did it when I couldn't afford to watch late into the night. After dealing with that for a while, we started locking the coop. The problem seemed to have been solved. The first litters my grandmother had were huge for small dogs, 4 to 5 puppies in each litter, and she had 4 litters. She had them in side-by-side kennels on the carport, lifted off the ground. There was way too many to have inside. All the animal care was my responsibility. I was in school to become a vet, so I stayed on top of the puppies, since she had to put them outside. They were about 3 weeks old when someone started coming at night or during the day when we weren't at home and taking them, just one at a time. Police reports were made, just nothing ever done. I thought it was weird and hoped at least whoever took them was bottle feeding them and planned on selling them. I was so wrong. They took 5 puppies in a time frame of 2 weeks. In 5 days, the puppies started being brought back. One a day, decapitated, and blood drained. But they didn't bring the whole puppy back. They either brought back the heads or the bodies, never both. They knew exactly which puppy belonged to what litter, and put the puppy parts in with the rest of the puppies for me to find when I examined them daily. I was mortified. Surprisingly, it was my fault according to my grandmother. Apparently, I teased the neighbor by going outside every day and gave him a show. Someone had to feed the animals and do the yard work. After all the puppies were returned, the next week, I woke to dogs dead in the yard, beaten and stabbed to death with a pitchfork. After the 3rd dog, I couldn't take any more. I packed whatever I could fit in my car and moved to my dad's an hour away that day. As I was leaving, with tears in my eyes and my grandmother screaming the word whore at me, there he was, in his usual spot on the property line, smiling at me. He His smile sent chills down my spine, and I instantly felt rage. I flipped him off and screamed, "Fuck you," out of the window as I passed. And his reaction was to blow me a kiss. There's still a lot of tension with my grandmother all these years later. I still go to check on her and visit, but I don't ask about the animals, and I never stay long enough for him to realize I'm there. I haven't seen her neighbor since, and I don't look or ask for him. So creepy neighbor man I only knew as Russell, please let's never meet again. I'm from Backwoods County, Utah. The entire area was awash with original urban legends, theories on Skinwalker Ranch, and government conspiracies. It was easy to find a few bored teenagers interested in taking a trip out to Blue Baby Bridge or go hunting on the hillside Glut. It was less easy to find someone interested in investigating something government-related, considering an incident with Skinwalker Ranch and how close-knit and informed about one another the community was. Things government-related were just untouched, even if ears perked up at the mention of anything fishy in the area. Freshly 18 and with a car of my own, I was wholly into everything that was unusual in Utah. At that point, I had moved to Colorado, which in my opinion was far less interesting in terms of tales and happenings. I had a week off from work and decided to take a trip to Utah to visit old friends. Many had moved away, but 2 remained, and it being a small town, they were easy to locate. Both were just as bored as I was, and both were nice enough to split gas money if we all agreed on a trip out into some random part, further east from where we were. It was a pretty common thing for teenagers to do in the area. There were a lot of hidden camping spots and cool hieroglyphics further up in the canyons, and even some simple cave systems. The most interesting things tended to happen at night. Bored as we were, we couldn't care less about seeing something unusual. We craved it. Craved meeting up with one of the urban legends, craved seeing a skinwalker, craved stumbling upon something we shouldn't, because we hadn't experienced the unusual. Most of people's adventures ended in disappointment or fake and easily debunked tales. As the sun descended over the horizon, we drove north from the town. Ophelia, sitting in the passenger seat next to me, seemed to have an exact idea of where she wanted to go. She pointed me down a few roads, through a couple of significantly smaller towns, and finally, east along a road that led to Bonanza. Initially, I was confused. Why Bonanza? No one cares about Bonanza. Nothing happens there. It's dust and mines and caved-in dead ends. She ignored me for a large portion of the journey, only giving me directions periodically and blowing off all my inquiries. Boris sat silently in the back. When we grew a few miles closer to the town, Ophelia had me pull over, and at that point, her unusual behavior had my palms sweating. Boris leaned over the console between us, saying how he didn't think this was a good idea, and how we could be potentially in over our heads, how the rumor sounded implausible and stupid. I was irritated at that point. Boris knew what she was doing, but I didn't. I felt more like the clueless driver than anything. I finally turned to Ophelia for an explanation as she was digging in her backpack and passing Boris and I flashlights. If it's true, it could be something really cool, she had said, popping open her door and stepping out into the dusty night air. Her refusal to fill me in was unusual, but the fact she dragged us into another set of antics wasn't. So, with a less than amused sigh, I shared a look with Boris and exited the car. To our left were tall silhouettes of deserted hills. In front of us, winding dirt roads, miles from civilization. Ophelia shined her light up into the hills and crossed the road. Boris and I followed in tow, shining our lights around the sage bushes and up along the hill, just as she was. "What are we looking for?" I remember asking, and was again ignored. She seemed more focused on the telephone poles and following the connected wires. "Do what I'm doing. Look where each is leading. It's along the road somewhere." I pressed her with more questions, but did as she said, and the three of us ended up a long ways apart. I remember heading further south down the road, so far from Ophelia and Boris that I could hardly make out their lights. My eyes followed the light up the telephone pole and along the barely visible black wires. I expected them to trail to another pole, like the last several I had investigated. The wires disappeared into the hillside. I squinted hard to see where they connected, and failed to see any kind of structure the wires could be feeding into, aside from small rocks and dirt. I jogged back down the road and called out loudly to Ophelia and Boris, telling them I found something unusual in the lines. Ophelia seemed ecstatic and raced ahead of me until I had to slow her down and point to the pole. Her jaw hung open for a good several moments before she was speeding towards the hill and trying to scramble up the loose dirt. I was fed up with the information she was withholding, and I told her I was going back to the car if she didn't tell me what she was looking for. She shushed me, started pressing on further up the hill, rambling breathlessly. Something along the lines of an old man she had spoken to, who believed there was a military base or something hidden beneath the Bonanza Hills, where the telephone lines disappeared into the thicker hills north of the community along 45. By what she described, he was a paranoid wreck. The entire thing had me more and more anxious. It was pitch dark aside from our lights. I had chills down my spine, and every noise had me jerking my light to see if anyone was there. It could be serious shit. It could be nothing. I didn't want to end up abducted into a facility or filed as a missing persons case. Boris seemed to share my sentiment. He cupped his hands around his mouth, repeatedly calling for Ophelia to get away from the lines. Not only was it dangerous, but unwanted attention could be called to us. I must have jinxed us with the thought, because further up the hill, multiple lights, in far better condition than our own, touched over the hills and landed on Boris and I. I was too blinded to see who it was, and too spooked to stand there and wait for them. I remember panicking, flicking my light towards the hill to see Ophelia skittering down the face of the hill, kicking up rocks and dust and taking off down the road like the track runner she was. The individuals, men, shouted obscenities at us and demanded that we stop and put our hands up. I didn't give a second thought to sprinting after Ophelia, clicking off my flashlight and relying on the light of the moon. I heard Boris's hard footsteps and ragged breathing behind me, and several shots from firearms. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. When we reached the car, we scrambled in, and the doors weren't even shut before I had shakily jammed my keys into the ignition, turned around, and sped down 45 as fast as I could. Several times I thought I was going to end up in a ditch or off the road. Ophelia insisted I keep my headlights off for a mile or so. I didn't see the point. There was one road, and they knew where we were going. No headlights came behind us, however. The drive felt like ours, and it was only when I hit close to the 3240 that I began to feel remotely safe. On Highway 40, I didn't let up on the gas in the slightest. Days later, a couple of men, obviously not local, were reported to have been roaming around the town asking questions about 45. If anyone had recently taken a trip down there, if anyone had come back from Bonanza. No one knew about our venture. We had said we were going camping and nothing more, and had the minimal gear to prove it. I continue to think about it to this day, and is one of the reasons I keep my ears tuned for things similar. I haven't been back to Utah for years. I don't talk about this with many people, but I'll never forget how deeply unsettling it was. So, personal background. I was 18 at the time of this story, and I worked in a large chain bookstore in my hometown in Alaska. I lived in the shady part of town, living with one roommate. It was all we couldn't afford, with a notorious alcohol homeless problem. That being said, I walked alone 15 minutes down the incredibly busy street to work, so most of the time I felt pretty confident that if something did happen to me, someone would notice and help before things went too far. I was a young lady who always dressed very nicely, so catcallers were nothing new, and usually got disheartened when I paid them no mind. Once I was followed to work, but the doors were locked to the public at 8 a.m., and I managed to lose him. I paid better attention to my surroundings after that, but this was different. I was walking home. It was a particularly sunny day, late summer, and I'm about 1/5 of the way there when I got a really bad feeling. Looking briefly over my shoulder, I saw a shabby-looking man trailing behind me, shuffling at a very languid pace compared to my brisk walk. Since there was a bus stop just ahead, I tried to convince myself it's nothing, you're overreacting. He's just a homeless man boarding the bus. I kept walking. The bad feeling persisted. It wasn't that kick in the gut feeling, but more like something just hovering above your back and not quite touching. You know it's there, but you don't dare look at it. So about halfway home, I look behind me again because I can't shake my vibe. The man was still behind me, shuffling a good distance off due to the difference in foot speed, but staring straight at me. He made no noise, no yells. He hadn't muttered a word when I passed him earlier. He had seemed weirdly out of it, and now he was trailing behind, ghastly and dark against the light pavement. I started to panic. I broke into a run, and I realized that my apartment was around a couple corners, and I usually cut through a parking lot to get there, so I could, maybe, lose him in the street. I looked behind me again, praying he had turned away or stepped or lost interest and turned back. He was still there. I hoofed it around the corner and down the road, unlocked my way into my apartment building, and signaled the lift. I looked out the lobby window into the street and saw nothing. I remember sinking in relief against the interior of the elevator, thinking, thank God he's gone and it's over. There were large windows just outside the lift on every floor, with a great view of the street below. I happened to glance outside as I started to turn the corner into my hallway, and he was there, zombie-like, slow-moving and heading towards the complexes. At this point I flipped shit. I sprint to my apartment and lock the door behind me, diving into my bedroom and leaning to look out the blinds. Did he see me? Did he know which building I was in? He shambled down the middle of the road and was now looking both ways, slowly scanning each parking garage and alley, stopping for a moment to look behind the dumpster. For the first time I saw his face, other than the shine of his eyes in the distance. He was expressionless. His features were sunken in, his shoulders and hands were bony and strange. But in his lean, you could see he was hunting for something. And that chilled me to the bone. The man meandered to the end of the street, looking both ways before picking a direction and walking away. I was certain that was the end of it, that he hadn't seen me. I told my roommate what happened, and they drove me to work for the next few days. I didn't see the man, neither in my street nor the curb where I had first encountered him. The bad feelings subsided, and I forgot, for a while. About 2 months later, I was getting ready to walk to work. My roommate had offered to drive me, but the weather outside was overcast, and I wanted to bask in the cool of the afternoon. I got to the lobby, popped on my headphones, and was about 10 steps to the door when I saw him. Down the street, standing squat in the middle of the road. Still something out of a nightmare. Needless to say, I went back inside and called my roommate for a ride. We drove past him, and I tried not to notice how his eyes bored into the passenger side window as we turned the corner. Moral of the story, ladies, femme-presenting folks. If you have to walk to work through the shady part of town, make sure you stay on a main road. Carry headphones with you, keep a phone on your person at all times, and if someone starts to follow you and won't let up, find a safe destination and just keep walking. This is my high school creep story, so to begin, I'm female and average height. I did track and swimming, so I was below average weight. I was skinny and had not a lot of muscle, surprisingly, since I did sports. I was a freshman and 9th grade was exciting. I had a few friends, but mostly focused on school. I was in advanced math and language art classes. There was a boy named Josh. He was in every one of my classes except for my math class. I didn't talk or interact with him a lot. I got weird vibes from him, but I decided that I was being weird. My friends told me that Josh always asked about me. What I liked, who I liked, pretty much everything about me. I thought it was a prank. After about a month of asking about me, he started talking to me. The first conversation was awkward. You're a random person, right? He would ask my name, pretending he didn't know. I would nod and go back to organizing my locker. He kept talking to me. Would you like to come with me and my friends after school? No thanks. I didn't know him. Why? He asked. I have a lot of homework. I made an excuse. He asked this every day. His friends would come up to me and say that we would make a good couple. I would tell them I was not interested and ask them to leave me alone. They joked I was in denial. Jerks. That's apparently what they told Josh. He came up to my face again. I heard you like me. Funny rumors, right? Yes, very funny because it's just rumors. I would make sure he heard every word I was saying. I also heard you were in denial. You shouldn't ignore your feelings. Josh grinned. I really wanted to punch him in the face. He has been bothering me for a long time now. I decided to be nice. Look, I'm concentrating on school, and I want to go to college in the state my college is in, so I'm not trying to date anyone. Your friends are confused, but I don't like you that way. He walked away and glared at me. The next day, he didn't show up at school. He didn't show up for the next week, claiming he was sick. When he came back, I guess he expected me to talk to him. He would follow me around, but I wouldn't say anything. We had most of the same classes. I went into my math class and Josh almost followed me inside. That's how I found out he was trying to stalk me. He talked to my friends more, saying we were dating. I would tell them he was lying, and thankfully my friends believed me. Someone stole my schedule. Then Josh knew exactly where I was. I would take frequent bathroom breaks in between classes, just to stay away from him. He told my friends he was trying to use reverse psychology on me to make me like him. Like not showing up to school to make me miss him, or being a jerk, since in his mind, girls like jerks. He always made jokes about me. He would joke about my ethnicity, race, or how I apparently had chicken legs. He said that Chinese people ate dogs and cats. I am Chinese. I told him to stop being mean. Then he confessed that he was just trying to be cool. I told him to leave me alone. He followed me even more after that. He signed up for the clubs I was in, stole my personal items, stalked me, talked about me, and tried to get the same schedule as me. I couldn't prove he was the one who stole my things, so the principal couldn't do anything. He tried to get on the bus with me. He told everyone we were dating and in a great relationship. I told everyone that we weren't. He convinced my language arts teacher to let us be partners. He just stared at me, while I did most of the work then he copied off of. I was obsessed with good grades. I couldn't take it anymore. So I told the school counselor. She talked to Josh and his parents. He told me he was sorry and asked if we could be friends. He told my school counselor before and he talked to me. So I was basically forced into this friendship. I had a birthday party which wasn't really a party. I would just hang out with some of my friends and eat cake and open presents. I chose Chris. We lived in the same neighborhood. We were good friends. I texted him when the party was, and somehow Josh found out. He showed up at my doorstep. I was freaking out. My mom answered the door, telling Josh that I was somewhere else with my friend. I know it was mean, but I was scared of him. He got angry with me at school and tried to hit me. His parents talked to the principal, and Josh could stay in the school, but he had to switch classes and stay away from me. Josh, for yours and my sake, let's never meet. Update. I forgot to type this last part. Josh lost his reputation at school. His friends are still friends with him out of pity, I'm assuming. Most of the girls stay away from him and are creeped out. There was a note that was slipped into my locker, saying it was my fault everyone hates him. Some students are on Josh's side, saying I overreacted, and that I lied when I said he came over to my house. Now it's summer, and I haven't seen him since. But I have heard rumors from my school friends, saying he got into juvie. I have received a text from him about 2 weeks ago. Then I blocked him. He was asking me about how I felt about him. I didn't text him back, but if I did, I would have told him that I hate him from the bottom of my heart. He told lies about me, and how I did terrible things. One of the students lost her phone, and he told everyone I stole it. I got my locker and backpack searched. Everyone hated me. I lost a few of my friends since they didn't want to be hated by the other students. Now I know they weren't very good friends. Thanks for ruining my reputation. To Josh. I don't want to see your stupid face and your ignorant personality, so stay away from me if you want to keep your teeth. Just to clarify, I am a female in my early 20s now. This happened when I was about 12 years old. I was in year 8, I'm guessing that is the same as 8th grade in America. Anyway, I was on my way home from school with my friend Kira. Kira was really small and had very childlike features. She was also extremely timid and easily scared. We decided to take a quick detour to the local supermarket for a drink and some snacks. Although this was frightening at the time, I'm glad I made that detour, and you will understand why very soon. We got into the shop and went straight to the sweets aisle. It was fairly empty. There was only me, Kira, and a young Muslim girl stood staring at all the variety of sweets. She was smaller than Kira, and like I said, Kira was small. If I had to put an age on this girl, I would say she was about 7 or 8. I couldn't see her parents, but just assumed they had told her to choose some sweets and then return to them. I'm a very observant person, naturally, and will instinctively react if I see someone in danger or figure out what to do if I notice anything suspicious. As we were browsing for sweets, I noticed in the corner of my eye a man stood at the bottom of the aisle, staring. I ignored it for a moment, thinking he was checking what aisle he needed. But he stayed. He didn't move. I shot a glance over to him and tried to work out why he was stood there. The man was also clearly Muslim. I would say around the age of 30. For a second, I figured he must be her father. But something didn't seem right. He was staring blankly at her. I turned to the little girl and then back to the man. I did this several times, and with no doubt in my mind, I knew he was watching her. If he was with her, surely he would have walked over to her or called her name. He was not her father, her uncle, her brother. I looked towards him again for a moment, and I could tell his eyes were so fixated on her that he hadn't noticed me staring at him. I looked away as not to stare too long, but it was bothering me. I could still see him in the corner of my eye. I need to intervene, I thought silently. Kira had been talking continuously at this point, but Somewhere in the conversation I had switched off. She tugged my arm and I turned to her. Something had to be done. This girl's parents were nowhere in sight, and I knew I was the only person who could potentially stop whatever sick ideas this man had for this girl. I looked back at the sweets, but kept the girl in the corner of my eye as I told Kira to be quiet, and I explained what was going on. "Shit," she whispered. "What do we do?" I had been thinking while she panicked. Brave but very naive 12-year-old me decided we go stand with the girl. We are going to walk over to her. As we stand next to her, you keep your eyes on the man. Do not take them off of him, Kira. I am going to ask where her parents are. With that said, we walked towards the girl, one of us at either side of her. My heart was racing for fear of what his intentions were. I tend to get very angry when I'm afraid, and my fear was solely for this girl. I knelt down beside her and said, "Hello, where are your parents?" She looked at me puzzled. I realized now that we looked like the creeps, not him. "I'm not sure. They told me to grab what I wanted and then go find them." I looked at her face, so sweet, so innocent. I replied, "Would it be okay if we helped you find your parents?" I didn't want her to go find them alone in case the man got to her before they did. "Yes, please," she replied. Kira never took her eyes off of the creep the entire time I was speaking to the little girl. She said he looked angry and sort of confused at what was going on, and he walked away just before we took her to find her parents. I took her hand and hurried her along as we searched a few aisles for her mother and father. It didn't take long until we found them. I was relieved as she ran over to them and placed her sweets in the trolley. "Thank you," she said. Her parents looked at us with concern, so I approached them quickly to explain why she just thanked us. I told them that a man had been watching their daughter intensely for the past 5 minutes, and I was worried I couldn't see her parents. They thanked me many times before I left the shop. I remember how terrified the mother looked as I told her. She took my hand and thanked me again before we left. It's over, I thought. The little girl is safe, and I'm so glad I took a detour. Me and Kira left the shop, and Kira decided she didn't want to go home yet, so insisted I come to her friend's house with her. Not today. I really need to get home, otherwise my dad will start to worry. She nodded and set off in the opposite direction. I began walking home alone. It felt strange. Something in my gut was telling me to turn around. I walked through the car park and past the usual shops. And then I turned. He was behind me, merely yards away. As soon as I caught his eyes, I turned around and picked up pace. My heart was pounding. I was only 12. I knew I couldn't outrun a grown man, and I was way too small to fight him. "Think!" I screamed in my head. I kept passing shop after shop. No one was around. It was roughly an hour after school ended by this point, and all of the school kids had been to the local shops and gone home, usually in large groups. The sweet shop, I thought to myself. At the top of this path I was on, inside the car park supermarket complex, was a small sweet shop. Nearly all of the kids from school flocked there after school ended for their cheap sweets. I knew there was a security guard inside. He was always there. He watched out for the kids stealing sweets. If I can get to the shop before it closes, I'll be safe, I thought. Yes, it closed early on school days as The customers were us kids. I was hoping for dear life the shutters weren't down. I knew if it was closed, I didn't stand a chance. My route home was simple, but not so much if you're being chased. After I passed that shop, I had to turn right under a bridge, then climb large stone stairs to walk over the bridge, to then walk up a large hill to get home. I didn't stand a chance. Not to mention I had severe asthma that was made worse when I was panicked or nervous. I picked up as much pace as possible without running. I didn't want him to think I was aware that I was being followed. He was walking at a steady pace, but keeping his eyes glued to me. Suddenly, as I was about to reach the shop, I saw the security guard. He stepped out of the shop just as I reached it. I scurried over to him and told him everything that was going on. I told him what happened in the supermarket, and then that he was following me. I felt my heart pounding as the man slowly creeped closer. I have about half a mile to walk. Please. He cut me off. He looked angry. Go, now. Don't stop walking. I'll stop him and keep him here as long as I can. Don't look back. Just move as fast as you can. I ran around the corner and then heard the security guard say, Stop. I then speed-walked as fast as my legs could carry me over the bridge. His voice faded as I walked further. I knew he wouldn't let him hurt me. I felt okay. That feeling in my stomach had gone. I was okay. I reached home with no problem. I never told my grandparents, but, like I say, I've always been cautious, and even if I put myself at risk, I'm glad I was able to help that little girl. So this started about a month after I turned 19, and I recently just turned 20. And this is still ongoing. About a year ago, my mom got the opportunity to open a small store. The location of this place is inside of like a multi-purpose building. This building is actually a former asylum that's been reconstructed into a thriving little location. But this isn't a ghost story. My mom's store is like an indoors farmer's market. We're at the end of the building. There's only one room after us, and that room is a small cafe. When we first started up this store, we had a lot of friendly customers that would come in and out. My mom would bring in her baked goods and canned goods and sell them. After a week in, there was one man that stood out to me. I had seen him in the building before, but never in our part of it. He was usually in the consignment shop or in one of the art rooms. But one day he finally came in. My first impression of him was immediately negative. He walked across the room towards me and my mom, and he called over, "Ah, there's a girl with crazy hair over there," talking about me and my, at the time, bright pink hair. Now, I get that my hair can be a conversation starter, but it's one thing to give me a compliment about it, and it's another thing to call it crazy from across the room when I don't even know you. We learned that his name was Stanley. He was an older gentleman, about 60. He had shabby grey hair, pretty tall, and a constant dull expression on his face, even when he smiled and laughed. On the way home that day, I told my mom that he was obnoxious and annoying, and that I didn't quite care for him. But we both ended up shrugging it off. No big deal, right? The next time he came in, he once again rubbed me the wrong way, but also gave me slight creeps. He was wandering around, and kept looking over to where my mom and I sat behind the counter. My mom informed me that she was going to go to the next room to order us some lunch. As soon as she left, Stanley came walking over. "There's the girl with the crazy hair," he laughed. "It's still pretty crazy, huh?" I laughed it off as he tried hitting up a conversation with me. He made me pretty uncomfortable. Eventually, my mom came back in. He turned the conversation on my mother. It stayed pretty casual. He bought something, then left. I told my mom how aggravated he made me. He eventually started coming in all the time. Each time it was the same thing. "I see the girl with the crazy hair. Her hair is still a crazy color." After a while, I stopped responding to him, and my mom would take the conversation into her hands. He started asking me random things like if I was single or if I smoked. It made me angry. I barely knew the guy, and it was none of his business. Eventually, my mom recruited other vendors to sell stuff. The other vendors rarely came in. We always just sold their stuff for them. My mom's friend started sitting with us during the day and helped us with things. Her name was Meredith. Eventually, I started sitting far back behind the counter where the cash register was if I saw Stanley coming in. I would leave it up to Meredith and my mom to deal with him. I even began putting my earphones in. I would never actually turn my music on, though. I pretended to. But really, I listened as Stanley tried hitting up conversations with me. I wanted to know what he was saying. I would ignore him and act as if I didn't even see him. "She always has those earphones in," I heard him chuckle to my mom and Meredith one day. "Oh shit," thought to myself. Then my stomach turned one day as I heard him say something else to my mom. "She's a very cute girl. How old is she?" "She's 19, my mom told him. I was angry that my mom would even answer that question. It was none of this dude's business. Then, of course, he went on about my hair again, which was at that point purple. The thing that began making me angry was that he would always comment on my hair. But the thing is, Meredith also had purple hair. She always had dyed her hair purple, but he never said anything to her about it. It was always just my hair. I found that odd. One day while I was driving us home, I noticed that my check engine light was on. I told my mom, and we had my older brother look at it when he got home from work that night. He told us that he checked everything and nothing seemed wrong. Then, out of curiosity, he checked my gas cover. It was gone. Somebody stole my gas cap. I immediately told my mom that I bet it was Stanley. I don't know why he would have done it, but he always parked next to my car when he came. And he had been there that day. We told Stanley about it, and he didn't have much to say, which made me even more suspicious. Of course, we have no solid proof that it was him. My mom is required by the state to put her name, address, and phone number on all of the food products that she makes and sells, just in case a customer needed to contact her. Which means, of course, Stanley had all that info. He began calling our house. Yes, we still have a house phone. And the first few times he would call and tell my mom things like, "Your bread was a little dry," or "I tried your relish, it was a little bland." Things like that. Then one day my mom totally freaked me out. She said that Stanley had called and was asking questions about me. She didn't really say what kind of questions, but she also said that he was saying that I was a very pretty girl and all that crap. He never once mentioned my mom's food. The conversation apparently stayed on me. One of my mom's friends that does the store with her, Jean, is certified to take care of mentally handicapped and disabled people. She takes care of a girl named Christy. Christy is about 30. She can walk and talk, but has the mentality of a young child. Jean would bring her into the store sometimes with her. Stanley once again called my house and began telling my mom how Christy was a very pretty girl and that she had a wonderful smile and that kind of shit. It creeped my mom out, and she immediately called Jean and told her to make sure Christy was never left alone while in that building. This kind of garbage continued happening. Eventually, the cafe next to us was switched out with a different owner. The new owner, Tiffany, was a 30-year-old married mother of 3 young kids. One day we were in talking to her since it was a slow day. My mom looked out the window and said, "Ah, crap, Stanley's here." And his old blue van pulled into the parking lot. Yes, the creep drives a van. Tiffany sort of laughed and said, "You guys don't like him either." We told her no, and that I found him very creepy. Tiffany informed us that he lived on the same street as her. She said that she couldn't stand the creep. She told us that he would drive by her house slowly sometimes, and peer into her windows to see if she was in their kitchen. Every time he saw her, he would make comments like, "There's that pretty tiny thing," or "There's a pretty young thing." I began telling her about all the weird stuff he had said and done to us, and she told me to stay away from him. Meredith's husband rents a room in the same building, and he sells his paintings out of. He told us one day that Stanley would always go to his room first, before venturing down to our end of the building. He told my mom that he would always ask if my mom and I were there, and if he said no, then Stanley would leave. If he said yes, then Stanley would begin asking questions about me. He also told us that there was a few occasions that he found Stanley standing outside of his studio window, just staring at him. Then when he realized he was caught, he would just smile and wave before going inside. Things began getting worse. We informed the owner of the building, and she told us not to be rude to him because it was bad for her business. Thanks, lady. Stanley began doing strange things like informing my mom that he still had food from her that he bought months before. My mom would tell him not to eat it, and that it was probably no good by now. He would just laugh. He brought in a dish made from those little Christmas mints that my mom had made, and that he had bought in December. It was like April at the time, and it was all broken. He told my mom that he dropped it, and asked if he could have a refund. My mom said no, and that he shouldn't even still have it. It had to have been stale. He even went so far as crumpling up one of my mom's cookies in front of us, then asking for a refund because the cookie was nothing but crumbs. One day I was forced to run the registers since it was just my mom and I at the store, and she doesn't know how to run it. Stanley had come in and was talking to my mom. I had my iPhone sitting on the counter next to me. Yes, I know that seems non-professional, but the store isn't really a professional store anyways. It's very laid back in that sense, but anyways. I never lock my phone. and Stanley had seen my background. Then out of the blue asked, "Can I see your pictures?" I looked up at him and just kind of blinked. I wasn't sure what he meant. He gestured to my phone and asked again. I was super taken aback by this request. He was asking to go through the pictures on my phone. My mom, of course, didn't say or do anything to help me, so I held up my phone and briefly showed him my background picture, which thankfully wasn't anything personal. My background was a picture of 5 seconds of summer. The 4 band members standing in like a hallway. He frowned when he saw what it was and asked if it was a picture of my friends. Keeping it short and sweet, I said no. Then he asked if I knew them. I said no. It was just a band that I listened to. Thinking back on it, I should have told him that yes, I knew them, and maybe it would have steered him away a bit, thinking that I had these 4 close large guy friends. The next day was once again just my mom and I. Stanley, of course, showed up. As he was walking towards us, he saw me and jokingly said, "Who's that strange girl sitting over there?" My mom, trying to joke back, said, "It's a hitchhiker I picked up." Then Stanley nodded and said, "Yeah, I'd pick her up too." It creeps me the fuck out. Later that day, I was telling Tiffany about it while we ordered lunch. She told me that if he gives me a hard time, that I was more than welcome to go and sit in the kitchen with her until he leaves. I told my dad that night about Stanley. He decided that he was going to come to the store with my mom and I the next day. He wanted to meet this guy. The next day, my dad was introduced to Stanley. Stanley asked if my dad knew me. My dad said, "That's my daughter." And Stanley nervously chuckled. Then he tried asking my dad about work and stuff. My dad wasn't having any of it. He gave him short answers to everything and acted very uninterested. Finally, Stanley caught on that my dad didn't care for him too much. "Are you staying all day?" Stanley finally asked him. My dad told him yes. Stanley kind of grunted in disapproval. My dad asked me to show him around the building since it was actually his first time being there. And Stanley slowly began following us, trying to see if my dad was actually staying all day. My dad and I went outside for a little while and stood by my dad's truck. We pretend to look at the new grill he had just bought. But really, my dad was waiting for Stanley to leave, so that he could leave as well. Stanley stood by us and tried talking to my dad some more. He again asked if he was staying, and my dad said yes. That was the most my dad would say to him, though. Finally, Stanley got frustrated and said, "All right, well, bye," then left. I thank God for Tiffany. Every time she sees that Stanley is in the building, she comes in and asks if she can have my help with something in the kitchen. Likely moving boxes or something. I always say yes. There's of course no boxes for me to actually move. She just says that so I can get away from him. The most recent time this happened, Stanley saw me go into the kitchen. He stood by the cafe counter and tried talking to Tiffany and her hired help, Darcy. "Where's all the young girls in there?" I heard him ask. Darcy spoke up, being a mother of 2 young kids as well, and said, "Sorry, no young girls here." "You're not a young girl?" he asked her. Darcy is in her late 20s. Darcy shook her head and frowned, then responded with a no. I was standing in that kitchen for about an hour while Stanley was out talking to my mom and Meredith. Once he was gone, my mom informed me that he was asking where I was. My mom told him that I was helping Tiffany and Darcy in the kitchen, and Stanley responded with a, "Oh, I knew I saw her out there somewhere." The next thing is a story from Tiffany. She told me that her son, who is in 6th grade, was riding his bike with another boy, and their female friend was walking a bit behind them. They were going by Stanley's house, and Stanley went outside. He said something to the girl like, "Oh, you don't have a bike?" Then he offered her a ride, even though she was with her friends. It freaked the girl and Tiffany's son out. Tiffany's son knew how much of a creep Stanley was since he creeped by their house a lot, and he has witnessed the way Stanley looks and talks to me. Her son even told her that he saw Stanley looking me up and down one day, which does not make me happy. On another occasion, Stanley was telling us that he used to be certified to take care of people with disabilities, just like Jean was. But he got his license for that taken away one day for having a girl at his house. He told us that he tried to have her hide her car so people didn't know she was there, but Stanley's girlfriend called the cops and reported him. My mom couldn't understand why having a girl at his house would have that kind of consequence. I told my mom that it had to have been something illegal, like maybe a prostitute or maybe an underage girl. Our store is in the middle of a bunch of apartment buildings, and there's a small road that loops around all of the buildings. Well, just yesterday I was bored out of my mind, and right across the road in the cemetery, there are Pokestops and a gym for Pokemon Go. So I decided to go for a walk to hatch my eggs, hit up the Pokestops, and catch some Pokemon. I was walking the loops, and I looked up for a second to see Stanley's stupid blue van driving around the loop, heading towards the store. I put my head back down, and he drove right by me. He didn't even slow down. So I sighed with relief and kept walking. He apparently didn't see me. He was still in the building when I returned, but was in the cafe bothering Tiffany. My mom pulled me aside and told me that Stanley walked up to her and said, "So, your daughter doesn't get into people's cars?" I told my mom that he didn't even stop and offer, but my mom was still freaked out that that was even in his mind. It has me pretty freaked out too. And just now, my mom told me that she just found a message from Tiffany that said, "Oh my fucking god. No matter where I go, I can't get away from Stanley. I went to the store and he parked right next to me." Obviously, this is all still happening. I don't know that we can actually call the cops since he hasn't attempted anything. But I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. I wish I never had to meet him again, but we're going to my mom's store tomorrow, and I'm sure we'll be seeing Stanley.